Okay, comrades. The meeting was due to be led off by Michael Roberts on the, if you like, financial and economic issues involving Iran at the present time. It's probably a long-standing with
Lost John's sound. We can't hear you, John. We can't hear you. It's a
Very,
bit
very,
better.
very faintly.
Sit near the mic, put the microphone near you.
not quite near the mic. Hello? Can anybody hear me now?
Yes.
We can now if you speak up.
All right. Well, it's the man to lead off. The notice of the meeting spelt out, if you like, the economic difficulties facing the Iranian people since the overthrow of Mossadegh in the early 50s, which was a joint Anglo-American brain wave. And quite frankly, the whole situation in Iran has been. They expect the Iranian people, the Iranian government, to dance to imperialism's tune. So if the Comrade Imam can lead us off and explain the situation post the uprising that took place, I think less than a month ago, where it's now reported that up to 10,000 people were killed by the brutal repression brought in by the Islamic Republic. So can I pass it over to you? Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
sure.
I try to probably, given the comrades are here, are hoping, or at least I was hoping as well, to hear what Michael had to say about the background and the changes. So let me just add some of the issues, and hopefully we can talk together and we come up with possible other issues that I think are important to discuss. In terms of the role of the US, etc., in today's situation, what we see is already one, or what Trump calls an armada, moving into the region. And then also we do have the possibility of another naval cruiser effectively moving up to the area as well. And the expectation is that if you like, the drums of war are being played louder and louder. There have been also changes in terms of the region. Maybe I could say a few words about what is happening in that part, and then probably mention what are the other issues which has to be taken into account, which I think do have an impact on the whole scenario. From the point of view of saying that there is a war possibility at the moment, I think everybody's been talking about this and everybody knows that this has been put on the table. The problem of current situation is not just the issue of whether they can actually attack or not. There have been changes. On the one hand, the Islamic Republic has said that they have ramped up and produced a larger amount of defense forces, etc., within Iran. And the warning that came up from the Ayatollah Khamenei that if there is a war, it would be a regional war. These are major changes. There have been talks about some help provided in terms of radars against the stealth airlines, etc., being transferred to Iran. in order to give Iran, effectively, or the Islamic Republic of Iran naval forces, some sort of a possibility of being able to combat part of these military attacks. In other words, what is being said at the moment is that if there is any situation with any kind of attack on Iran, there would be an escalation. Everybody probably have heard there were notions put forward that the US would actually make a couple of attacks so they can say we have done some military action, and Iran would respond with a couple of attacks, both of them pre-known with practically minimal, if any, damages, but it would allow a room for both sides to claim some sort of a victory and put an end to it. From all that's been said is that the Islamic Republic has rejected that idea and has said that we do not consider any action to be one-off action, and they want to actually go forward and then make that action continuous and go for a full-scale war. Now, this changes the scenario tremendously. It's not just whether there are places where Islamic Republic could attack. This is the scenario that could actually mean a larger escalation of a war, which would not be easily something that they could close down and stop. So the limit, or if you like, the end result is hardly known. To what extent that would expand to, given the missiles and ballistic capability of Iran following the 12-day war, this could actually be even a preemptive, or Iran has said it would be even a preemptive strike on Israel and any other targets that Islamic Republic considers to be appropriate. So the escalation, or if you like, the start of the war, or even the possibility that there would be an attack, could be actually responded militarily with a heavy hand. There is nobody, or nobody can actually say what would be the outcome of this and what would be the implication of this. One of the ideas was that if that does take place, if the war does take place, a variety of regional forces have expressed, from Saudi Arabia, UAE, and many others, have said that they would not let their airspace be used or their borders be used by the US. And this was said to be a possibility of one thing, and that is they could actually be faced with possibility of missile attacks on them. Well, this is a slightly different from what used to be the case. Up until a few months ago, this was a possibility, or if you like, a scenario considered by many. But that has changed. Over the last couple of months at least, we have seen that there has been if you like, a different attitude, whether you look at it from Saudi Arabia point of view or others, with regard to the situation of the war taking place. And this is because of the policy that Israel has put forward in terms of its new Middle East plan. We have seen this in terms of the pressure that Saudi Arabia put on UAE in terms of what happened in Yemen, and similarly with regard to the issue that we have seen in Sudan and recognition of the part of Somalia by Israel. And therefore there is a turn in here. What we're seeing today is some sort of a change. This goes on from Turkey to the rest. The idea of Israel being the only and sole, if you like, power in the region is not being accepted by them. So that is one reason why these countries have already stated that they would not like to see any escalation or any change in this regard with regard to the war. So US going to the war is being, in a way, resisted by both the forces, military forces, as well as the political scene that we see today in the Middle East. At the same time, there have been talks of help provided by Iran, to Iran, namely that of the possibility of the transfer of new radars by China to Iran, and obviously the fact that Russia does not want to see an instability further escalating in its southern borders, which is in Iran. So the US is effectively facing problems in terms of carrying out the war. At the same time, the idea came up with possibility of talks. The diplomacy, which was considered to be in here, took place about 10 days ago when US and Iranian officials had talks in Amman, in Jordan. And then there is a possibility, or at least has been an announcement, that there would be a second round of talks in Switzerland, again between US and that of the Iranian officials. Netanyahu did fly to US and had talks. The talks was behind closed doors, but everybody says there is one thing, and that is that the Iranian regime has said that they would not discuss anything other than the nuclear issue. Whereas the US wanted to talk about the missiles and also the relation between Iran and its proxy in the region. Israel has openly stated that the issue of nuclear is not really important to them anymore. What they want to talk about is the issue of missiles, because the missiles could actually target Israel and could reach there. And the capabilities have increased quite a bit over the past few months. So Israel has put forward the idea that what should happen is the talk about missiles, and without that, effectively, or the words that was used in Israeli press was that they would not consider this kosher if it is the case that the issue of missiles is not considered. In other words, they will veto it. Given the pressure that Israel can bear on Trump, whether you look at it from the point of view of second-term elections in November, that's one thing. And also, given the talks that Trump is supposed to have with China in June, any idea of reaching a diplomatic solution, which is effectively, if it goes under the terms of just nuclear, which is what Iran has said, and US, Rubio actually clearly said that we are going to talk about the nuclear issue, is something that Israel would not accept. Israel wants it to be definitely that of the missiles as part of the main point rather than just the nuclear. Talking about the nuclear would actually take you back to people actually started to talk about the previous talks, the JOCP that Iran had actually signed in with all of the UN 5 members. And that was torn up by Trump. Trump said that that was not good enough because the issue of missiles, etc., are not taken into account, and it's not a good deal. So literally what we find out is that they can't go back and reinvent the same thing again. And Iran has clearly said that they would not talk about anything other than nuclear, and at the end they only want to see the lift of the sanction as a response. So the talks currently, or what is called as the talks, has not actually taken place. They at the moment are talking about what can or cannot be discussed. And if the decision becomes to be just the issue of nuclear, effectively this would actually carry the veto of Israel. It is important to consider the veto of Israel from several actions. We saw about 3 weeks ago when the US Navy said that they shot down one drone from Iran that had gone close by. Now that drone was said not to be carrying out a invasive, if you like, in terms of attack drone, but it was a view and getting information of the area. That drone was shot down, and there are talks that this could have been done by CENTCOM, which is effectively the joint force military of the US and Israel, to shut down the drone. So here we have got one problem, and I think this is the problem that is not ours, but it's that of the Trump. Going to war, there is no definite outcome. Following the talks in terms of identifying some sort of a means of a peaceful resolution and talking about the nuclear is not accepted. So US is held in two parts. It can't benefit from the talks, it can't benefit from the war. Now, this is the situation as it is now. That's why the status quo at the moment is being continued, because there is no definite answer of which one would actually be beneficial. There are also considerations to take into account. The June talks that US and China are supposed to have, for that, both parts want to have as much leeway and as much leverage as possible. If Iran does stop the flow of oil and the shipping in the Hormuz section in the south of Iran, that would actually mean that there would be a choking of some of the energy requirements of China, which is something that China would not accept. And this is one issue. Leverage here was what Trump wanted before the talks in June. Venezuela, to some extent, provided that other part, and that was trading of all of the oil of Venezuela with dollars rather than the way that China was operating with Venezuela. So this means that any lack of progress in this area would give little leverage to Trump when it comes to talks with China in June. So from this point of view, US needs to show a winning card, but at the moment, neither of the approaches is something which will benefit or can confirm the expectations of US. What I'm trying to say is that what is being decided to some extent is seen as if something is to be done about Iran, but it's taking place in the background of bigger issues, and that is what happens between the relation of US and China, and in terms of the talks that are taking place in June, so therefore the leverage that both of them are looking for. Having said that, there is another issue geopolitically which is important, and that is with the recent place that Iran has taken in terms of providing a ground route through rail from south of Iran to north. This would mean that it is possible to produce any goods in Russia or even the countries in the Middle Asia, Uzbekistan, etc., up north, and being able to directly take them by route on the ground all the way towards south of Iran to the sea and to the Indian Ocean. And this would open up the route for India. This would open up the position of not having to rely on any other, if you like, air routes, etc. This is a major thing that India is looking for. Countries in the Middle Asia are definitely looking for, and Russia is looking for. So they do not want Iran in turmoil because that will break that route completely. And as a result, they want to make sure that there is some sort of a stability, some sort of an agreement with the current state in Iran. So what we have is an acceptable format. US has clearly said that they're not looking for regime change. They just want to have some leverage, and they want to make sure that Israel's requirements in terms of lack of possible missiles from Iran is actually implemented. But they cannot enforce that because the position of Iran militarily, position of the US militarily cannot guarantee that. So the status quo is continuing. Neither, if you like, reaching an agreement diplomatically, nor carrying out the war is the scenario of today. This is a change from what we had as a previous unipolar world to a multipolar world. It has to be some sort of an acceptance in terms of what US and China both require. They both require each other, but they need to recognize each other. And at the moment, US is not on the path of recognition of anyone else. And the status quo, therefore, has produced more problem in a different setting around the world. The situation of the Islamic Republic is also one issue in here that plays a major role. Economically, the situation in Iran cannot continue. Everybody knows that that cannot continue. because the stranglehold on the currency on one hand, and the situation of the carrying out of the sanctions, which have over all these decades literally has translated into pressure on people in Iran, has made it difficult to predict with the Islamic Republic ability to be able to cope with situation economically, even if you're not thinking about it politically. And this situation makes it impossible to predict whether the Islamic Republic would be able to survive this, given the political pressure from below as well. Currently in Iran, one thing could actually change this. This is the, if you like, the dilemma of the states. But one problem is that the working class in any of these areas could actually make a major change to the whole thing. This is the bit which is very unpredictable for all these possible scenarios, even the retention of the status quo. And that is that at the moment in Iran itself, there is a pressure that people have actually are literally, partly shocked in a way, but more importantly, they are actually being faced with a frightful scene of so many deaths. And this is something that is very prevalent across Iran. In this situation, obviously, there is a lot of anger towards the Islamic Republic. Right wing is trying to actually make, or if you like, hijack this in terms of their favor by actually saying we got to go to war, we got to change the Islamic Republic, we got to change the Islamic Republic in a way that they want to actually gain some foothold. But in terms of the society as a whole, the anger is, and also at the same time, the sorrow of all of the deaths is something which we see mostly in the country. This is the situation. So what can be done? Insofar as the working class is concerned, insofar as the, if you like, the social institutions, etc., are concerned, getting together, rebuilding, restarting, getting the foothold back on again in terms of the protest is something which has started. Last week we started to see the beginning of those. The Tuesdays of the pensioners from variety of workplaces, the protests started again. We started seeing some protests in south of Iran in terms of the workplaces like steel workers. And we're beginning to see a return back to the situation of building protest on one hand, protests against the possibility of war is also, these are being rebuilt as well. We're beginning to see some new statements from variety sections of the society in terms of saying no to the Islamic Republic, no to the war. This is again starting, and it needs time. Recognition of the situation is after this recent attack, there is a growth back towards the protest actions we used to see, but it is coming up. We still need more time, and I think that's being recognized across the society. The propaganda of the right wing trying to show that the only person available or the only force available against the Islamic Republic is at the moment the monarchies, that is taking place at the same time. They've got all of the media in their hands. Any protest is being put into that sort of, if you like, bag, as if it is the representation of all of the people and everything else. They are bringing a lot of people to the streets. You saw some demonstrations across different countries yesterday in Europe and that of the US. The implication of that was that everybody supports the return of the son of the old Shah. Many people took part in those simply because they were expressing their anger against the Islamic Republic. There are still some people who actually think that anything out of this situation could be an answer. And this is the bit which I mentioned that the benefit of the war has brought out. And that is, if the Islamic Republic is there, can we just get rid of it? Anything is better than what it is today. I happen to be one of those people who have seen this before. The Union in 1979, anything is better than the Shah. This is the propaganda which actually brought some people onto the streets. But in terms of what happens within Iran, the situation is not similar to what we see outside Iran. There is protests is still taking place, but it's starting again to regrow. The Islamic Republic is taking very heavy-handed against any protest. They've got new excuse that anybody who protests now is in support of Israel, etc., or US attacks. But the status quo is continuing. I do not see at the moment US having any hope of either the war or diplomatic talks. They're in limbo. But retention of this status quo is beneficial both for the West and also for the Islamic Republic. So they try to retain this situation as much as they can, because then they can continue. But if you're living in a country where it is difficult to make your ends meet, if it is difficult to put food on the table, even if you go to work, if it is all of the problems that you had before is still there, and there is further anger for the Islamic Republic, this is not the end. We will see further protests. We will see further changes. The question is the extent that the at least conscious part of the working class is able to sustain an alternative which is neither the Islamic Republic nor the current situation, and the way out of it. And this is what is taking place at the moment. And I thought at least give you a picture of why is this situation continuing in terms of not knowing which way we go and the status quo. Two, in terms of everybody's working to what extent they can. And here, it's not just the working class, it's not just the people of Iran, but the political parties all are pulling up their own forces. What we don't want to see is a war. What we don't want to see is the shadow of a war. What we don't want to see is the sanctions. And what we don't want to see is the continuation of the current situation, which in itself would mean no better or worse than the war, or if you like, the diplomatic means. And this is where we are at the moment. So let me stop here.
Well,
I think we lost John and Dominic, maybe.
yes. Well, while we're waiting for John, I'm very glad to see that Comrade Michael Roberts has arrived. We were very lucky that Aman was here, was able to fill in for you. I don't know if there was a misunderstanding about the timing.
Yeah, I
But,
didn't get any message at all about when it was going to start. Not one.
Well, there's something wrong with your emails then.
You must have gone spamming.
Well, that
Oh,
being
well,
said,
anyway, you're here. So, Michael, over to you.
Well, apologies everybody for what's happened. I'll see if I can pick up from what Aman said. Last Tuesday was the 47th year of the Iranian Revolution. Normally that's filled with sounds of celebration, but hardly on this occasion, given that what we've seen over the last couple of months or so is a truly awful situation. Through December and January, there's been most extensive wave of protest since the early 1980s swept Iran, with hundreds of thousands taking to the streets. The recent mass protests there have been brutally suppressed by the regime. I don't know what a man thinks, but the estimates vary. But the government says a couple of thousand, but I think it's more like 10 or 20,000 or maybe even more that have been killed in the repression. The protests were triggered by a sharp collapse in the Iranian currency, which was partly engineered by the US authorities, which drove up the cost of basic commodities dramatically. And what we've seen now in the repression, some have argued, is the largest mass killing in contemporary Iranian history, one of the largest ever. Footage from the cities, the major cities in Iran, show use of all sorts of heavy weaponry against the protesters, including machine guns and even machetes and knives, adopted by the military in order to repress the protests. And last June, we saw a series of military attacks by the Americans, which started off this whole process middle of last year, with aerial strikes against the various parts of Iran to take out their defense systems and to try and move the top brass in the Revolutionary Guards and assassinate them. And of course, imposition by the Security Council of the economic sanctions against Iran. Now we have a position, it seems, where Trump, egged on by Israel, is threatening another military attack. The excuse is that Iran is still developing nuclear weapons, but the real aim, I think, is regime change and the setting up of another pro-West puppet regime. And in this situation, we've seen an attempt by the Iranians to negotiate something with the US. There are talks going on, presumably in Oman and other places, in order to try and find some way in which they can avoid military action. Meanwhile, Trump is stepping up the amount of military hardware he's got in the region and proclaiming that regime change is the best thing that could happen in Iran. So this is almost a terminal situation now for the Iranian government and the regime. And what we've seen since last June is an accumulation of long-standing crises that have built up to this protest. You've got a 40% depreciation in the currency over the December-January period, which led to initial protests in the bazaars in Iran, where bazaar owners were unable to even carry out business given that the inflation rate was more than 40% and rising, foodstuffs rising in price by over 100%. And I suppose the question I would like first of all to deal with is how has Iran's economy got into such a low level, given the fact that Iran has huge natural resources and a very well-educated workforce. It should be in the position to progress and develop its economy much better. In my view, there are two reasons for this. The first is the result of the failures of this regime, but previous regimes too, under the Shah, of course. The Shah absolute monarchy came to power through a coup carried out by the West, mainly by the CIA, to remove the elected Prime Minister back in 1953, and the establishment of Hassan, who ruled for over 25 years as an absolute monarch before the Iranian Revolution drove him out in 1979. Then Iraq suffered an invasion by Iraq. Saddam Hussein, backed by the West, conducted an 8-year war against Iran, which led to the deaths of over 500,000 people. Throughout that, the Iranian people have survived, but now controlled by a clerical autocracy supported by a military elite that owns and controls large sections of the economy. It took several years for this rule to be fully secured, but eventually the mullahs and the clerical regime, through the security forces such as the Revolutionary Guards, were able to methodically destroy every potential opponent in Iran between that period leading up to the invasion by Iraq. And so the main reason is the complete failure of the Iranian regime to take the economy forward over the last 25, 30 years. Of course, that's also a combination of strangulation by the West over reducing and trying to bring about repression of the isolation of the Iranian regime through sanctions and military escapades. But if you look over the last 2 years, 2 decades, we see a persistent pattern of decline. According to the international agencies, Iran's GDP growth was just 434 billion. And given a population of 90 million, that means the per capita income is so low that it's the 117th lowest in the world of individual income per person in Iran. Annual inflation, as I say, is over 40%. 33% of Iranians live below the official poverty line. The unemployment rate is near 20%, with half of men aged between 25 and 40 being unemployed and not being able to get any work. And over the past 2 decades, one of the most pressing structural issues has been the inability to create any sufficient employment opportunities, particularly for a young and growing population. Millions of university graduates remain excluded from the labour force as there is no work. In the last year, in a country where the wealth of fossil fuel reserves, that country has faced a severe energy crisis with energy shortfalls of 50% of its total generation capacity, leading to production losses for the economy as a whole of 30 to 40%. And the depletion of water resources has meant that major dam reservoirs supplying Tehran, for example, have reached critically low levels, just 7% of full capacity. So this loss of income through, on the one hand, the mismanagement and corruption within the Iranian regime, and on the other hand, from sanctions, has created this situation. It's estimated the loss of income from the sanctions applied by the West is an accumulated $12 trillion over the last 12 years. So that's a huge amount of money that could have otherwise helped to develop the living standards of the Iranian people. So now we have an Iranian regime, a failed capitalist state, with 10% of the world's proven oil reserves and 15% of the gas reserves unable to do anything much at all in taking the economy forward. So we now enter a period where everything has been sucked dry over the last 20 years by the demands of the mullahs and the military, the combined budgets of their religious foundations and governments taking up 30% of total spending. The Revolutionary Guards controlled about 1/3 of the Iran's economy through subsidiaries and trusts, and over 100 companies in Iran with the annual revenue of 12 billion are controlled by the Revolutionary Guards directly. So the bulk of major infrastructure projects and all the money that flows from that and the oil and gas revenues are in the hands of the regime and not used to develop the situation for the population as a whole. Smuggling networks and other corruption goes on within the regime. Iran, of course, has been forced to spend hugely on the military because it has to defend the regime from the West and Israel. But also it sustains this military elite, keeps the mullahs in power. The cost of Iran's defense expenditure, including its nuclear program, is now approaching $500 billion that could have been spent productively on technology and raising incomes. As a result of its nuclear program aimed as a deterrent against Israel and the West, sanctions have led to the disappearance of any possible foreign investment to help develop the economy. So the government has zigzagged between state-directed control and pro-market liberalization in desperate efforts to try and get the economy going. In 2005, government assets were estimated at $120 billion. But since then, half of these assets have been privatized by the regime. The result that the economy is drained dry by the mullahs and the military elite. Former Iranian President Ahmadinejad said that 60% of national wealth is now controlled by just 300 people in Iran, most of whom shift their wealth abroad to buy foreign real estate or salt it away in secret accounts. According to the World Inequality Database, the top 1% of Iranians by wealth own 30% of all national wealth, and the top 10% of Iranians by wealth own nearly 2/3 of all the personal wealth in Iran, while the bottom 50% own just 3.5%. So these privatizations and inequalities have produced a ruling elite with, on the one hand, religious fundamentalists, on the other hand, a business faction that sometimes looks to reach accommodation with the West. The reformists in Israel are really pro-market. They want to get sanctions lifted and make whatever concessions to the West. The mullahs are unwilling to do that, of course, because it would mean the end of their regime. So neither wing of the elite in Iran is interested in improving the conditions of Iran's working class. The average worker's wage in Iran is about $150 a month, with many leaving the small towns where poverty reigns and seeking work in the big cities. The reality is that average wages in real terms in Iran have hardly budged since the 1980s. No wonder there has been sometimes labour unrest as workers demand higher wages, producing strong opposition from the regime. The housing crisis has deteriorated. 45% of household incomes are spent on rent. Workers report that even renting a single room has become unaffordable. And in the first half of this year, Iran's economy continued to stagnate with a struggling energy sector, rapid depreciation of the currency, and accelerating inflation. Before the latest round of protests actually began, the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, was addressing a large audience, and he said to them, "How do you expect me to solve this? Where do you expect me to get the money from?" He held up his hands in resignation. No wonder the protests started off amongst electronic vendors in the Tehran bazaars. These individuals were particularly exposed as they're completely dependent on foreign supply chains in order to procure mobile devices and sell them on and so on. The government tried to negotiate with the Bazari to begin with, because in that sense, the small businessmen were very important to the regime and have negotiations with them. They don't allow any sort of working class protests, which are quickly repressed. But when the movement spread beyond just the bazaars into the general population as a whole, then we had a massive campaign which spread across for a brief time against the regime. This led, of course, to the repressions that we've seen dramatically over the last period in Iran. Now, there's a question of what sort of protests these are. I don't know what Matt thinks, but I think that they generally were genuine protests against the cost of living, against the regime. But of course, there were no doubt agents provocateurs from Mossad agents and the West. And also we had a wing of pro-Shah Pahlavi slogans appearing. It appears that a section of the population, I don't know how large, want to bring back the Shah, as that in some way this will be an improvement after decades under the Islamic Republic. But on the whole, this is a protest, a genuine protest by the population, which now has been subsequently repressed. And various reformists or people are showing some opposition to the regime. Not only have the people in the streets been shot down, but various political leaders in opposition to the regime have been arrested, thrown in jail. The Green Movement has been brutally suppressed. Hossein Mousavi, a former prime minister, has been under house arrest for many years. We've seen the various attacks upon the freedom protests in 2022 after the killing of Jina Masad Amini. And now the Reformist Front, an organization which was instrumental in getting the election of the current president, Pezeshkian. They have been arrested by the Revolutionary Guards, and so basically a complete clampdown on any sort of opposition. That leaves the regime, it seems, in a political vacuum. On the one hand, we have the possibility of attacks by Israel and the Americans in order to force the Iranian regime into a deal or possibly to overthrow them. And on the other hand, we have the seizing opposition to the regime from the people as a whole, which has had to be viciously repressed by the regime, and tendencies towards more reactionary opposition being fomented by Israel and America. So if you want to look at the strategy we have now, a collapsed economy, the axis of resistance against the West also collapsing, Iran is increasingly isolated. The regime has seen the decapitation and weakening of Hezbollah, one of its supporters, attacks on the popular mobilization units in Iraq, and of course the complete destruction of Gaza. So the resistance which Iran has been promoting against to defend itself, the regime, have begun to disappear, and they're now increasingly weakened. They're looking for a way out. The negotiations, what you might have is the Americans looking for a Venezuela option to force some of the figureheads of the regime to be removed and other leaders to come into position where they would accommodate themselves to the needs of the West. That's one possibility. A forced compromise under intense pressure. Israel accepts a deal that limits its nuclear program, allows inspections, basically in return for sanctions relief, allows Americans to come into the country and invest and take control. That would prevent immediate war, but it would become at the end really of the ability of the regime to offer any sort of resistance. The second one is that the regime continues its resistance through if the US launches strikes against the leadership, then maybe the leadership will resort to counteraction, escalation, attacks on US bases, on shipping lanes, Israeli cities, perhaps mobilization across the Gulf. Whether that's practical, I don't know. But clearly, that's another possible response to the current situation. And the third one, I think, is just that the regime collapses. It's an uncontrolled collapse under combined external pressure and internal unrest. The regime fractures, producing not a transition to anything better for working people, but to a power vacuum which various security factions and forces within the Iranian elite begin to struggle, either accommodating themselves with the US or trying to go in a different direction. So I think we're in a situation where the Iranian regime is on the edge. It may or may not survive, but what is clear, all the options before are either oppression of the people within Iran and possibly a war, whether short or long, will expose the Iranian people to even worse dangers from the missiles that we've seen up to now. It's a misery without end that the Iranian people have suffered. And at the moment, I can't see any way out of this. Maybe others can.
Thank you, Michael. I think that both speakers, Aman and Michael, spelt out in some detail the position in Iran. The position is one that's fraught with many difficulties. And as far as I'm concerned, you have a situation where Israel is hell-bent on keeping, if you like, turmoil and strife going in the Middle East, whether it's from the situation in Syria, where they're looking to try and get a combination of Druze, Kurds, etc., to form an opposition to the government in Syria and just keep Syria on the boil. And I think the position, was spelt out in the last meeting by Aman, was that the people in Iran look at two countries where there has been, if you like, a collapse. One is the collapse that took place in Libya, and they do not want to see a Libya situation arising. And the other is a collapse that they've seen in Syria, where they want to see, if you like, that not happening, where there is the real possibility of sectarian strife, etc. So I'd like to throw the meeting open to comrades, to come in with their thoughts, ideas and questions to both Michael and Aman. So could I see comrades? At the moment, nobody's showing their hands. No, I'm not going to declare the meeting closed. Thank comrades for turning up. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think, Matthew. Can you come in, Matthew?
Yeah, I think in as nobody else wants to say anything, I think there's a few things to be said on this. I mean, obviously the issue really, obviously is one of both the situation in the Middle East itself, and as the Iranians have made clear, they're saying, okay, well, if there's a war, it will be regional, and the question then obviously becomes one for all of the regimes in the area, and that all of the, as far as I know, all the regimes around about Iran, at least 9 of them, have all lobbied the US to say don't do it, because obviously they're all terrified, which includes obviously all the Gulf potentates and Saudi Arabia and so on. So it also, of course, it does then also prefigure World War III. Of course, it's part of the whole thing for World War III, this, because what you're looking at then is obviously an effort by the US and its agent Israel in order to consolidate control over the Middle East. which then draws in the questions of Russia and China, because the object of the US is to attack both. There's no question of it, and you can see moves by there's been reports of moves by the Russians and the Chinese to support Iran. So in those terms, the whole world is going to it's quite likely to get drawn into this, relatively rapidly, if it happens. And the problem is that obviously everything's on the table. I mean, I think in those terms, I mean, it's not just about the instability of the Iranian regime. It's about the whole question of how does the working class itself oppose war? The first thing is to say, well, obviously we oppose the imperialists. I mean, we oppose the Americans. We oppose their agents, the Israelis. We oppose, obviously, the involvement of the British and others as well. Because, I mean, at the bottom of this, obviously, there will be the British will be playing a role, as they usually do. Usually a fairly rotten and disgusting role as they played in Gaza, of course. So it's actually, does the working class actually, not just in the Middle East, but also on a world scale, actually oppose this war, and see we will, defend Iran against imperialist adventure, and we will oppose the imperialists, attacking, any country, particularly obviously, this one in the Middle East. And that is the key question. And of course, the problem being, of course, is that in large part, the likes of the unions, with certain honourable exceptions in Italy and other places, certainly the unions in Britain, are all thoroughly imperialist. There's been no opposition of any particular organised type to Gaza. And in fact, of course, in some cases, like likes of United and GMP, they've been positively in favour of war. They passed a motion at the TUC saying they were in favour of war, and of armament and all the rest of it. So this is the problem we've got, and I think it has to be taken on that world scale rather than purely as a regional thing, or in terms of Iran as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Is there any other comrades?
Can I just say something? Oh, go on.
Sorry?
No, you go ahead.
Can I just say something? I think as far as America is concerned, there are serious misgivings, not just on the left, but on the right. You've got the likes, I think it is, of Steve Bannon, seriously objecting to the fact that Israel is making US foreign policy, and Israel, in its own interest, or not in its own interest, but in the interest of the elite that at present are governing Israel, if you like, the clique that are around Netanyahu, are doing everything they can to ensure that there is turmoil and strife in the Middle East. Whether that turmoil and strife is involved in this current situation in Sudan, where you have, if you like, a civil war going on, where one of the Gulf states is actively supporting the Janjaweed militias in, if you like, developments of strife between Arab Sudanese and African Sudanese, whether it's the recognition of Somaliland. Israel is the first country in the world to recognise, if you like, give diplomatic recognition to Somaliland, breakup of Somalia, that they are actively involved in land grabs in southern Lebanon, and also in the expansion of their occupation of the Golan Heights in Syria. That as far as it goes, it suits Israel down to the ground to have this whole, sort of strife going on. When Trump came in, his big aim was to, if you like, give concrete ability to what was called the what's it, Accords, the Abraham Accords, which basically meant that Gulf states would recognise Israel, come to agreements in terms of economic deals, etc., with Israel. That's all been thrown into turmoil by the Israeli government's brutal Palestine. Quite frankly, I think I might have spelt out last time, there's a consciousness in the protests in Iran that they were not in favour of, if you like, terrorist actions in terms of burning properties, destroying infrastructure, and then in fact it's blamed on, if you like, the pro-Shah people, and the son of the Shah went to Israel, as far as I understand, prior to going, to intervene in, in that, calling for demonstrations, etc. Demonstrations are wrong, but as far as it goes, you see Israel, it's great, prints, just about everything is going wrong. I think, as I say, even from the serious objection to American withdrawal to foreign wars, Trump's whole thing was, well, we blame the Democrats for, as he called, getting into the wars, yet Trump seems to be the happiest in terms of fomenting strife. Myself, as was said earlier, the Iranian people are educated, they have great potential, Iran has great potential. The obstacles to it are, if you like, the mullahs and the army. I'd like to ask a man one question, if he can. Is there any signs that within the, we'll call them, for a better word, the security forces, of possible splits, the feeling that there might be some elements, even in the Revolutionary Guard, that might be sympathetic to the situation of the people. I mean, this generally does happen, that armies begin to crumble, particularly when, if you like, the lower ranks begin to question what the officers are doing. I know that in the 1979 revolution, was, if you like, elements of the army, the lower levels were antagonistic to the officer class. So I'll leave it at that comments.
What do you think, Aman? Do you think there's going to be a split in the Revolutionary Guard and there could be a breakup of the regime? Is it going to collapse, or is it going to stay, or is it going to compromise and sort of semi-capitulate like the Venezuelan regime has? Which way do you think it's going to go?
Well, historically, let's say, at least the experience last time, just a few days ago, we had the anniversary of the 1979. And you saw the Islamic Republic try to actually bring in people from different sections, some voluntary and quite a few under pressure to join the demonstrations on what they call the carnival. There is one thing, at the time that became to be the day that they recognized it as the day of the revolution, because that was the day that the army actually said, we're no longer going to go to the streets and we're not going to shoot. That's why it became the day of the revolution. That's how it became. So the question is, in this case, whether the security forces, variety of guards, etc., and that of the army, would they say, okay, we no longer are going to go into the streets? The question is, what would be they left with? This is the bit which is the issue. Insofar as the Islamic Republic is concerned, Islamic Republic is not the same as the old Shah's regime. They have said, literally, they have no quibbles that if they're going to go, they're going to take as much as they can with them. And this would mean havoc in the society. One of the major causes, or one of the main participants of what we call, in contrast to what could be a sort of, if you like, a acceptable changeover even, to a darker scenario, is the Islamic Republic forces. The question is that is the guards, etc., they're not, very many of them are not the same as what they were in the start of the uprising of 1979. Many of them are part of the whole capitalist production in Iran. So they look at for their benefits as well. A change question is what change? What West tried to accept? And if you look at the policies in terms of the US and the rest of the West, all the time was to look at the part of the Islamic Republic that they call reformists. Literally in Iran, we don't have reformists or hardliners. It's one establishment with many factions. One faction sees its benefit long term by agreeing or being closer to the US. That faction, they call it reformist. That is the faction which is there. It's not as if we have got Rouhani was one of those members. Khatami was one of those. These were the people from the reformists that were in power for years. So it's not as if always the hardliners were in power and the rest weren't. They have been in power as well. We have had them both. The question is that the changes that have taken place this time round, there was no major breakdown. The son of the Shah said, I've got 100,000 people actually going with me, 50,000 going with me. They are waiting to break ranks. The question is, what do they break rank with, for? That's the question. The West has always said that they would like one faction of the Islamic Republic to take its place. So even when they talk about regime change, they are talking about one faction taking the place of the current one, not anything from below. I don't think the son of the Shah at the moment has got that much of a chance. I think he's just a toy at the moment.
So it's
The
like
question-
Venezuela's option in a way.
That is always has been the most favorable option.
Yeah.
The most favorable option has been the people who are in power. They are in power. Why dismantle them? I remember during the time when Iraq was actually taking place, this was the same dilemma that the West had. Do we change Saddam and get rid of everyone? Or do we actually bring somebody similar to him? They tried it with something different and it failed miserably. So their favorite is something of the existing order that would not break up the strata and the structure. That's what they prefer. The problem that they've had is the same problem they had during the 1979. They can control bits, they can try and see whose benefit it would get. At the moment, part of that regime says, I am not facing that issue. The problem is, and this is the main problem in Iran, the problem is from below. The problem is whether the society would accept this or not. That is the problem they have faced. In 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini, when he came to power, he said, okay, we're having the transition, Shah goes, we'll take over. Now, he never called for the uprising. He constantly said, I have not called for the uprising. But what happened? From below, they went, they attacked the army barracks, and the army had to say, okay, I stop. So the problem is not the best scenario. The best scenario for them is one faction taking over the other.
Yeah.
The West says the only thing we want is this idea that one group can only control, and this group has had benefits. When the 12-day war took place, this in itself pushed back some of these supporters, if you like, of the West and possibility of dealing better with the West. It pushed them back because they said, look, we better go back and look east. So they have that problem. It's difficult for them to just say, okay, one group take over and everything would be hunky-dory. They know everything would not be hunky-dory because the situation in the Middle East at the moment is not that anybody says yes to the West would be okay. Israel is there. They want a different plan. So they don't have any belief, or there is lack of belief in the parts of the Islamic Republic that there would be a deal with the US and they would be safe. Israel is there. So the situation has become complex because of that. So this time round, There have been people who have said, we are not going to shoot. But the actual strata, or if you like, the structure has not cracked. The structure is there. What cracks the structure, that's what we said. It is impossible to actually be able to sustain a scenario where they could go back to what they had before, because the situation of the people, or if you like, the consciousness in the society has risen tremendously. They're not going to accept one dictator with another, especially a hereditary one. So there is no way anybody's going to accept a return back to monarchy. That's not there. Two, the recognition of the fact that we want to be able to actually have a say in how the country is run. This is major in Iran. We want to have a say how the country is run. Now, this is not possible with any faction of the state, and it's not possible, if you like, with the right-wing alternative of changing hand. That cannot happen. The main issue in here is there is something which is taking place in Iran, which we do not see in other countries in the Middle East, and that is a progression of consciousness within the society and the working class. That is the thing which is different. If they changed anything like this in Iran, soon as there is a slight opening, the question is, if there is any slight opening, people who have said we have managed by whatever means to push back the Islamic Republic, they're not going to stop. Same as what happened in 1970, they were not going to stop. There was insurrection, but there was never call for insurrection from the Ayatollah Khamenei, who was actually literally in power.
Well, the difference with Venezuela was that the working class is demoralized. They've lost.
Exactly.
They no longer believe in any possibility of change. The regime was seen as working against them, not for them any longer. They were demoralized for a whole period of time. The situation you're saying in Iran is different. Yes, they've been repressed economically. It's a disaster. But any opening that made by the regime will lead to a flood of movement, as we saw in the protests.
Exactly.
And that's what both the West and the regime are worried about.
Exactly.
They can't do a compromise deal and expect the Iranian people to accept it. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Exactly. The unpredictability is what historically we always said. It's always possible between the upper classes to reach deals. The difficulty is how can they control the others, the majority?
Yeah.
That is the difficulty they've got in Iran. Even right now, there is one thing about countries like Iran, and that is that the main reason why imperialists go there, the question is not just the case that they are dictators, so therefore imperialists are dictators, etc. That is common across all capitalist societies. We're living in the world of capitalism across all of these areas. Now, a society which, as you did mention, with 90 million population, some 40 or 50 million you're talking about working class, and huge number on the immense economic pressure, falling into poverty line non-stop. Now, these groups are not going to say, okay, anything is okay, anything is acceptable, and we keep quiet. That's not going to happen. The rate of literacy in Iran at the moment is 99%, even in the rural areas, in remote villages. So it's not, we're living in the world of the internet time. It's not possible to just say, okay, let's just change. We moved on. The world has moved on. So the main question is, we cannot control what the US does, war or otherwise. We cannot control what China does, what Russia does, what the Islamic Republic may do. The question is, we as the working class, we can control what we can do. So my questions, I think, is slightly, if I add to that, I think further than Iran, are questions that we have to answer. And that is, some say that, okay, we are against the war because the war is imperialist. Well, absolutely, we are against the war. But the question is not we are against the war because we are against imperialism. But we are against the war because it would actually break down the whole society in Iran. That's why we're against it. So the question is, it's not the case that we support the Islamic Republic against the imperialism. The Islamic Republic is not representative. So that's one issue. I think the second issue that is there as well is the implication across the whole Middle East. If you are living in Middle East, or if anybody actually thinks about people in Middle East, They say we are seeing what Israel is doing, what the local states are doing. To the minds of many, it may look as if the Islamic Republic is the only country that is standing up to Israel. That pushes up the rhetoric, the position that the Islamic Republic wants to take. So similarly, you see it across in Iran today. We were in a difficulty. People in Iran had a difficulty when it was to support the people in Gaza and standing against Israel. They did not want to stand in the demonstrations that the Islamic Republic was pulling forward. So they were caught in a dilemma. They were against the Israel, but they didn't want to join the officially organized protests, if you like, or demonstrations, because they didn't want to be aligned with the Islamic Republic. So they had to play it that they are standing against Israel, but they're not in favor of the Islamic Republic. Now, similar situation today. We are against the Islamic Republic. We are for any activity that could actually enhance the position of people against the Islamic Republic. The US or the imperialists are taking, or even Israel, are taking a position that they are against the Islamic Republic. So the question for us is, how do we stand, if you like, I think across the West, many of the working class has got that question. How do we stand against the Islamic Republic at the same time standing against the acts of Israel and the rest of the imperialists? Its position for, I think, socialists is very clear, but implementing that and, if you like, carrying our propaganda and carrying our message across, I think needs to be done delicately and clearly. We are against the war, we are against the US, but at the same time, we are against the Islamic Republic.
Are there
So
any
the question-
forces of the left in Iran?
Oh, yes, huge. But there is
Yeah.
quite a bit. That's the difficulty. Even if you listen to some of the other monarchists, the same as what Reza Pahlavi is saying, they're saying we cannot do it on our own. Left is not strong enough.
Yeah.
Right is not strong enough. Neither of them are strong enough, but they both exist. Society has them both. It is something they can see. It is there. And this is the fear of the Islamic Republic as well. They can go and crush, but the question is the aftermath they have to deal with. They have to deal with a society that has both left and right. And that is the scenario. I think questions of the discussion, one part is within Iran. I think one part of it is internationally. The internationally is, we can't just say we are against the war. That's not good enough.
Mm.
That is true. In Iran, people are against the war, and there are many people across the world who are against the war. The question is, we are against the war, we are against the Islamic Republic as well. We are against the benefit of the Islamic Republic. We're calling for opposition to the Islamic Republic, but we are against economic sanctions because economic sanctions only harms people.
You know,
We are
the
against
thing about the
Islamic
regime
Republic.
to me is they cannot solve the economic situation.
Absolutely.
They
No
cannot do
capitalist
anything
can.
about it. And therefore they're in an impasse there. They're in a position where they even recognize they ought to do something about it or shouldn't be like it is, but they can't do anything about it, not just because of the sanctions, but because of the way in which they've structured the
Exactly.
economy, and they've sucked all the wealth out of the potential for growth in that economy in the hands of a small elite. And they're not going to change that, though, are they?
That's right.
And therefore, this situation, is it going to drag on or is it going to go down? Are they going to collapse?
Well, at the moment, the collapse is the worst scenario.
Mm.
Collapse is one scenario, but it's the worst option. Collapse means breakdown of the society, variety of civil wars, variety of different factions. So collapse is what the right wing is calling. We are calling for a revolution. The question is, in carrying out that revolution, left is not strong enough. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right is not strong enough to cause the collapse. That's why for collapse, they're calling the US military action. That's
It's
what
a
they
terrible
want.
situation where neither side is strong enough. That's a disaster, isn't
Exactly.
it? That's what leads
So
to.
what we have
Right,
in Iran
comrades.
is not just the one part against the state. What I'm trying to say is, this is, I think, the debate that women can actually participate in. The idea of just saying, okay, we don't want the war is one thing, but the idea that we're standing against Islamic Republic at the same time. We want restriction on Islamic Republic, but we don't want economic sanctions. Economic sanctions give the Islamic Republic an excuse to blame everything on the sanctions. We want to take that away. So it's a recognition of that delicate procedure, I think, is quite useful.
I'm just going to ask, Matthew's got his hand up, and I've not deliberately kept you out, Matthew. I've just thought that, you know, the discussion that has been taking place is of great interest. Unfortunately, at the moment, there's only yourself who has his hand up. Is there any other comrade who would want to come in? Right, Matthew, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Comrade. No, yeah, I think what a man is saying is I agree with. I mean, the point being, obviously, we oppose the imperialists, but as he's saying, you know, it's the working class that's the difference. The point is we also support the working class against the regime. And the point is, as he said, how to put that over. And in terms of actually then also to build, you know, in terms of, you know, allowing the voices of that working class in Iran and elsewhere. I mean, the thing is also, you see, I mean, the thing about, you talk about instability in Iran. I mean, the instability throughout the region, you know, I mean, Israel is in a state of deep crisis. People are fleeing. You know, there's huge number of people leaving Israel. You know, they're currently sort of spending their time jumping up and down and so on, and saying how terrible it is that the number of people are leaving Israel. You know, and the fact that, you know, the society itself is in total chaos as a result of what they've done. You know, and you know, financially, of course, the state is completely broke. So I mean, you know, and you can look across the region. I mean, you look at Egypt. There's 70,000 political prisoners in Egypt. You know, from the Arab Spring onwards. You know, the regime just has been locking people up by the tens of thousands and shooting people. You know, and the rest of it just to try and get the lid on. The same, you know, Jordan. I mean, you're huge demonstrations in Jordan and efforts by the masses to burn the Israeli embassy in response to Gaza, because 60% of Jordan is Palestinian. You know, and you can go through all this stuff, and then splits between the regimes. I mean, you know, Abu Dhabi in particular, of course, is what they call the Arab Zionists, who are spending their time, you know, supporting the Israelis, who are spending their time supporting the most reactionary elements in Yemen against actually Saudi Arabia. And there's been, I mean, they're very close to outbreak of conflict between the UAE and Saudi Arabia around the questions of Yemen, and then of course obviously Somaliland, because it's the reason for the whole interest in Somaliland, because it's the other side of the Red Sea, and it too, like Yemen, is in a strategic position, which is why all these regimes want a piece of it. You know, and so, you know, you can go through it. The thing is also, because I mean, you look at socially, you look at these regimes in the Gulf. I mean, they you know, basically depend on this tiny layer. You know, most of the workforce is imported. There's no rights. You know, or very few rights. You know, so you just have this social instability everywhere in those terms, and something like this is you know, really opens up, as I say, so it should be looked at as a regional issue, and in terms of what the alternatives are. And the problem is, you know, then becomes a question, well, okay, you know, what political forces are there? And the problem being, of course, is there's never been really any, I mean, except with this sort of marginal exception of Lebanon, which is another question altogether, is another issue. You know, any real implantation of Trotskyism has been in the Middle East to any great degree. Apart from actually in the other exception is Iran. There's been a certain amount in Iran, but nothing breaking beyond Stalinism. And Stalinism has played its usual rotten and perfidious role, allying itself with assorted you know, despots and bloodthirsty elements, including Saddam, of course, you know, and other such people who usually turn around and massacre whoever, including communists. So in those terms, it becomes a political question. Well, what politically is the alternative? And you know, as the crisis actually gets worse, and I mean, then of course, I mean, the other question then becomes, under conditions in which there is, as we've seen outlined by comrades in terms of what happens in the US, what's the opposition to Trump within the US for, you know, as he seeks to create war across the world? Is there opposition within the American working class to that? I mean, in a mass sense, you know, as well as obviously the opposition to what's happening internally, because the two are intimately linked. They can't be separated, and they shouldn't be separated. and that becomes a central point. And some people have tried to, there has been an effort to link the whole question of Venezuela to ICE and so on. But this is what's happening in the Middle East should also be linked to the whole question of ICE as well, because they're all the same thing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ben, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I want to raise a question, Cummins, about the international nature of the workers' struggle and the importance of focusing on that. The organised working class is a significant force in a number of Middle Eastern and Western Asian countries, and Iran is part of both. It's part of the Middle East and it's part of the developments in Middle Asia. But the question is this: can we argue cogently for the unity of the working class organisations, as opposed to or in addition to the general statement about the problems can only be resolved by the working class and socialism? But in terms of organisation, can the workers' organisations in Iran be part of, or are they part of, an international movement which would include the more industrialised countries such as Egypt, or for that matter, Lebanon, or other countries where there's a strong working class? Is there a possibility of putting forward a cogent argument that the working class organisations should come together organisationally and establish their presence as a class across these countries? Because the only solution is an international solution. There is no solution to the Iranian question on the basis of Iran, just like there is no solution to the question of Palestine simply by focusing on the Palestinians alone. These are international questions and can only be resolved with an international struggle. So there's an international, like the international labour organisations, of which the trade union movements in various countries would be members of. Can we seriously put forward proposals that the organised working class, insofar as they are organised in Iran, should be in contact with and have discussions with the organised working class in countries such as Egypt? There was more organisation amongst Palestinians in the past, but because of the destruction of the links between Palestine and the people who went to work in Israel, that link is broken now. And I know the Israeli trade union movement, the Histadrut, is part of the state apparatus. It's a pro-Zionist operation, but nonetheless, there are significant class divide. There is a significant class divide in Israel as well. So is there a way in which we can put forward a demand or the call for an organised, some kind of an organisation or some kind of a meeting or a structure that would bring together, insofar as it's possible, the workers in Iran, the workers in Egypt, the workers in some of the other countries as well, insofar as they're organised? No, I know it's not easy in the Gulf because lack of democracy, but is it realistic to call for a working class meeting or convention with a view to bringing together the workers in these various countries? Because there's no solution otherwise. And even as has become clear in this discussion from the contributions that Michael and Amanda have made, there's no resolution to this problem on the basis of shifting around within the regimes. The only solution is to break out of that scenario and to try and create a working class approach. It's a bit like all these talks, the G20 and the international meetings of the capitalists. There's no workers involved in that. Like the Mercosur deal that was recently discussed between the European Union and the South American countries, there's no working class involvement in that. It's the capitalists coming together themselves to decide how can we best gain advantage by organising trade deals amongst ourselves. The trade union movement should be part of any discussion which involves jobs and trade and the expansion of industry. The trade union movement internationally should be organisationally involved in all of these discussions. No, they're not going to be called into the G20, the trade union movement, but the trade union organisation should insist that any discussion about international trade or agreements between countries should involve the organised working class. And that's the approach I'm taking here. Now, this is the form of a question, but is there a realistic and serious way in which we can call for the workers' organisations, insofar as they exist, in countries like Iran and Egypt and across the Middle East, and also into Asia, where Iran is also influential, or some of the African countries where they're influential? Can we seriously call for an organisational meeting or unity or something or convention of workers to discuss an alternative approach and an alternative solution to just leaving it up to those in the regime to work out amongst themselves so they can resolve it, and America intervening as an imperialist state to see what can we gain out of the situation, or China trying to make advances from their point of view. So it's a way in which we can call for workers' unity, including Iran and countries in the region and international organizations of the working class, to try and find a solution to this problem, which won't be found on the basis of the existing structures.
Thank you, Ben. Is there any other contributions? I feel myself that we've had a very full debate and discussion on issues.
We can't hear you, John.
Sorry, I'm just saying that we've had a fairly full discussion. Comrades, discussion. Ben has raised some very serious questions, so I'd like to ask Aman and Michael if they could come back on those issues. I think it is an important thing that you have a situation where you have the G7, you have sort of economic, the upper arm of the K is the rich getting richer, the lower arm of the K is the poor getting poorer. And in reality, you do have international labour organisations that are never involved in discussions about trade deals, what are the consequences, etc. We just have Trump wanting to make deals, wanting to make cars into some business.
John, the sound keeps coming on and off.
Sorry,
John.
Yeah, I'm saying Vince raised major issues, so I'd like to ask them and if they could come back on these. And quite frankly, I think myself, as no comrades indicated they wish to come in with other questions or contributions.
We can't hear you, John. Sorry.
Aman and Michael, Vince raised issues about the involvement in the labour, international issues, and also the labour being involved in, if you like, decisions or interventions in, so can you hear me?
John, try turning your video off. It might just help because I think your problem is your connection.
Yeah. I can answer some of the points that Tom's raised, and perhaps Aman can come in as well. It seems to me that we here in Britain, the British Labour movement, working class movement, the socialist movement, have obviously got to raise the issues. First of all, we oppose the attacks and the sanctions and the military intervention by the West and the possible bombing that may ensue against the regime, but we also oppose the regime, as a man says, and we look towards a transformation of the Iranian republic into one that's socialist, based on working class. And on those two principles, or two policies, we want to reach out to those working class organizations such as they exist in Iran, but also, as being pointed out, across the whole of the Middle East, because this is an issue which is not just within the confines of the Iranian borders, but also raises the whole question of the attempts of the West to dominate the region and also to provide and support puppet regimes in all these parts of the Middle East, whether it's amongst the sheikdoms, whether it's amongst the Egyptian military, whether it's amongst the new Syrian regime, which now supports Western intervention there, and of course in opposition to Israel and the forces within Israel too that oppose what has been happening there. So on the basis that it seems to me the policy we present here is one that we oppose the sanctions, the military intervention, but we also oppose the regime which has repressed and killed thousands of Iranian people in the recent protests, and has had no policies to improve the conditions of working people in Iran, and that we need a program for Iran which removes the regime and gives the opportunity for the working people of Iran to decide their own futures. And that whatever forces exist in Iran and elsewhere, that we would reach out to in order to try and link up with them in order to push that forward. There are organizations within the UK now amongst Iranian emigres who have some sort of policy like that. Most of them are more democratic liberals, but there are also socialists too. And that seems to me where the direction of our forces have to be directed. I don't know what Iman thinks, whether he can add anything to that at all.
I mean, I broadly agree with what was said. Finn actually did raise it as well in terms of what can be done internationally. Obviously, that is definitely something which would benefit not only about the situation in Iran, but across the whole board. I think that the question that we have, literally in terms of action, is that in Iran, working class organizations, even legally, are not recognized. So the idea of them actually having meetings with people outside in terms of the region is not something which is, at the moment at least, with this estate, practical.
Yeah.
It's not that it's not recognized, but the question is, can it be done? The answer is no. Even if the working class in Iran cannot have a conference across the whole society nationally, that is not allowed. The only time that we can actually see these forces of workers in different places by actually forming their own general assemblies, all being there in front of the management. That's the way they do it. They can't actually elect representatives to go to talk to the management because they would be subject to oppression immediately. So the possibility of actually having recognized working class organizations, A. B, being able to meet, C, with people from outside and not facing anything at the moment is not practical. But I think I have a question also politically in here. I do recognize, Michael did say, and I'm sure everybody in Win agrees, but I brought out a point which I think is amongst the left across many Western countries. Let me, if I may, I know it doesn't sound right, but let's play devil's advocate. Let's say if something happens and Iran attacks Israel military bases, larger scale. Well, this is an issue which actually produces, not necessarily for socialists or for anybody in here, but I think this will produce issues across the left in terms of, okay, it's attacking on Israel, an attack on military bases in Israel. Is that acceptable? So there are issues, and I'm sure there would be a lot of discussions among many of the left that they would actually, if you look at it from that point of view, they would have questions as what to do. My point is that politically, what needs to be done, the reason why I said in terms of recognition of the working class and obviously standing against war, standing against economic sanctions, standing against the Islamic Republic, is not because this is necessarily an issue in here, but I'm saying this is an issue outside. So going through that political discussion in terms of it is possible, it is recognizable, I think it is important. Let me give you one other example. I remember the idea was that any time that we see the US forces attack, then the questions of wars are just generally identified. I have got questions to ask. If it was the case, I'm not talking about military bombardment, but consider a country like when Taliban was in there. The question is, should we treat all the wars the same? Are all the wars the same? And could there be wars that we could say we don't have any position on? Could be wars that we say, yeah, there are issues with them. So there are political discussions like this in terms of wars, etc., which I think are also questions that needs to be raised, and it works across the whole left as a general thing. So my idea is that I think here is not the issue. I'm saying what are the issues which are outside within the whole society, which makes it difficult that anybody who at the moment comes and supports the working class across parts of the left, not everyone, is actually termed as if, oh, you're in favor of the Islamic Republic, or if you're against the war, you're in favor of the other one. This double scenario, I think, is something which needs political discussion across the whole left, not necessarily within us. I think this is an issue. What is the answer in terms of the situation which is happening with the connection between the working class? Well, the working class on its own obviously is a working class, but when we're talking about connections, international organizations, these are politics. The same politics that exists outside exists within working class. So the working class as a whole, or the working class in terms of its organization, the Islamic Republic at the moment has its connections of what he calls workers' representatives with ILO and with their other parts in the Middle East. Similarly, the other parts in the Middle East sit down together. So there are lots of organizations of what is called generally workers across Middle East. The question is, that is not the issue. The issue is in terms of what we refer political alternatives from the working class point of view, rather than actually being people that are being termed as workers and getting together. I think these are the issues. Same exists across Europe. There are lots of organizations across Europe of workers and representatives of their organizations, huge number of them. But the issue is in here that they are to some extent even recognized within G7 talks, etc. But the actual workers are not there. The representatives we're talking politically are different. So building that political discussion, I think, helps to actually make that possible. For example, we have got connections with many others, but this is politics of us rather than working class being able to have that facility to work through. And I think that is part of the political discussion. Workers across Europe and US, working across many different countries like Middle East. To what extent are we looking at those organizations? What politics we're talking about, I think is important rather than the form of it. I know Finn doesn't mean the form. He means actually socialist side, real representation of working class organizations getting together. I do recognize that. But I'm just saying outside of us, there are these organizations, but they're not really what we call as socialist alternatives, which is the difficulty. So that requires political discussions to a large extent to make that possible. Sorry if I went off the phone a bit.
It reminds me of what a friend of mine, unfortunately, is now dead. He was a Pakistani. And he said to me at the start of the Iraq war, he said, John, he said, I know of no Muslim that supports Saddam Hussein. He said, equally, I know no Muslim that feels it's the job of the West to remove Saddam Hussein. It's a job of the Iraqi people to remove Saddam Hussein. I feel, that to my mind sums up, if you like, the feeling, of today's meeting. It's the job of the Iranian people, to remove what exists at the present time. So as there's no other comrades indicating they wish to come in, Roger, could you come in and say where we're going in the next few weeks?
Yes, well, next week is another quite important meeting. Comrades will remember a few months ago the magnificent youth uprising in Nepal, which was also accompanied by similar revolts in a number of other countries in the region. And we've got one of the most prominent activists in the Nepal uprising who will be speaking next week. And we've also sent special invitations to comrades in all over from all over India, plus Pakistan, plus Indonesia, plus Sri Lanka, plus Philippines, and so on. We need. The idea is we want to play a role in bringing these revolutionary movements together. And as far as I know, there is no other forum where it's been possible for representatives of these insurgent movements to actually get in touch and communicate. We did have one or two meetings, but we're trying to proceed further on that basis. So next week, I hope that we'll have a kind of Asian youth and workers forum. And of course, I think that could be a big step forward for the movement there, but also a very important activity for us as an international network that wants to bring workers together and to promote international revolutionary solidarity. So that's next week.
I'd like to thank you, man, and Michael, for what I think has been a very stimulating meeting. If you like, much of the issues that have been raised, I think in the realms of people with intimate knowledge of the situation. So from that point of view, although there's not been a lot of comrades participating in the discussion, I feel that it's been a really worthwhile and stimulating discussion, bringing us all up to date on the situation in Iran and the Middle East. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank comrades for their attendance.
Okay. Thanks, comrades. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.